Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening with Natasha Diaz, who is the author of this month's book, Color Me In. We're so thrilled to have her with us tonight to ask all our burning questions about the book. We've been discussing it for a couple of weeks online. We've had a few meetings in Australia and New Zealand in person, the lucky ones that can escape their homes. But otherwise, we've had so many online meetings and a lot of really great discussion around the books. But it's really a thrill to be able to meet with the author and ask all those other questions that we don't know the answers to. So as a way of introduction, I'll do the short version. Natasha Diaz is a born and raised New Yorker, award-winning author and screenwriter, and currently residing in Brooklyn, New York, with her tall husband and tenacious daughter. Her debut novel, Color Me In, is out now, and she really hopes you vote. You vote. What should we vote for?
Well, for the president, but that was, I need to change it again.
Vote in general, right?
Yeah, vote.
When I read that the first time before the election, I actually thought you were in some sort of like running for
oh no, I am not running for office, no.
All right, well, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
And my first question is really more about an introduction to you, more than we just learned through that very short bio. But Can you tell us about the journey that led you to writing this book?
Yeah, so it's sort of been somewhat unconventional, so I'll try to keep it. Brief. So I was an English major in college. Never really thought I would be able to turn writing into a career. It was always a passion and a hobby, and I just felt like I would keep it as that. When I graduated college, I was working in the nonprofit sector with formerly incarcerated women. I had the goal and intention to get my master's in social work so I could have more direct impact. And I was doing that work for almost 2 years, and I was starting to get a little bit burnt out. I was in an admin position. I knew I was going to have to go back to school to get into the field, the part of the field that I actually was interested in. And in that time, a friend of mine asked me if I would have any interest in working with him, and it was a complete 180 because he owned his own production company, and it was a tiny independent operation where it was just him, and he had just gotten a really big gig, and he needed someone, and he was a very good friend of mine, and he was like, look, I know this is not an industry that you've been involved in or interested in, but I know you, and I know you would be really good as a producer. So if you want to come on, I can show you the ropes. And I was like, you know what? Why not? Because I could always go back to school. I've been looking for a change. I haven't been happy in this job. So I started working with him, and I completely fell in love with the industry. And so I worked with him for about a year and a half. Once that project it wrapped, it was a year and a half long project, I was sort of thrown out onto my own, and I had to sort of figure out how to be in the industry without my friend, because I was now a freelancer. So I was taking some weird Craigslist jobs. I started back at the bottom. I went from being a producer and then backtracked to being a production assistant, a PA. I worked a bunch of set jobs. And I was working primarily in unscripted TV, so reality TV. So I worked on Project Runway, I worked on Chopped, I worked on another model show that Naomi Campbell started called The Face. And I was doing that for a few years, and I transitioned from working on set to working in post-production. And I worked my way up in that to being a story producer, which is essentially the scriptwriter for reality TV, because in case anyone's unaware, it is pretty much all scripted. So I had sort of gotten to this place where I felt like, okay, I've really built a career. I'm doing a thing that I love. I'm writing, but I wasn't really very happy. And there were multiple reasons. The industry itself is a mess. Reality, unscripted TV is not unionized. And there's a lot of really foul play that happens in terms of the way you're treated and mistreated and underpaid and overworked. But it also wasn't the type of writing I wanted to do. And so I felt like I'm either going to keep doing this or I'm going to break away from it. And right around that time, my husband got a job offer that was going to move us from New York City to California. And I was like, let's do it, because we're both born and raised New Yorkers. We've never lived anywhere else, and we should really try to do that. Second of all, this will give me the chance to just start over. And so we did it, and I spent a year and a half taking online script writing classes, and we moved to Oakland, and I was taking trips out to LA constantly just to network and meet with anyone who would be willing to talk to me while I was working on a script, getting feedback. And once I finally got the script to where I wanted it to be, I started sending it out to managers. And when I finally found my representation, so it was through screenwriting, and so I was just chatting with them, and they were like, okay, so like what other projects are you wanting to do? Like, what's the next story? And I truly had a lot of imposter syndrome. I feel like I still do to a degree. And so I never even considered, even once I'd made it to this point where I had representation and I felt really more confident in script writing, partially because even though it was a completely different type of script writing, I had been doing it for a while professionally, but also at school as an English major, I took a lot of playwriting classes and script writing classes, and it was a medium that I felt more comfortable with, but I never felt that I had the ability to write a book. When I came up with the idea for Color Me In, which really, when I look back, I had been writing it in my head almost my whole life, I pitched it to them as a movie. And I have two managers. One is primarily film and TV. One is primarily books, but they share clients and they both represent people who do both. And my book manager was like, I really think this would make a really cool YA book. Is that something you would be interested in? I was like, of course, it's like my dream to write a book, but I can't. And he was like, why? I was like, I don't know how. And like, I probably have to go back to school for that. And he was like, no, let's just do it. And so it was like a really long process of him helping me as I sent in pages and figuring out my voice and figuring out how I was going to tell the story. And that, I think, answers the question. I didn't want to keep going. Sometimes I'll just keep going. You will be here till tomorrow.
No, totally answers the question. I think that we need to invite you back for another evening when we do Take Two reality TV.
Oh, I have all the gossip. Yes, let's do it.
I can't even imagine. Okay, I mean, that's so interesting. And you one thing that was interesting that you were talking about was that you had taken a lot of online courses, and they were screenwriting courses. How does screenwriting, for those of us that don't know, and I absolutely am one of those people, how does that compare to novel writing?
So it's so different. So the program I took, which I highly recommend, I loved it. I actually had applied for master's programs in screenwriting, which I didn't get accepted to, which ended up being the biggest blessing of my lifetime, because those programs were extraordinarily expensive. I would have doubled my student loan debt. But also, they don't guarantee professional success, right? Like there is some networking involved, and you do get a lot of practice and stuff, but it's still, you got to get out there and you got to pound the pavement. And so I would have been in a lot of debt with no guarantee that I would be out of it anytime soon. The program that I found is called the Professionals Program, and it's with UCLA, which was one of the master's programs I had actually not been accepted to. You still have to apply to this program, but it's a much smaller program that is essentially a 3-semester. Each semester is 3 months long, and you can do it in person or you can do it online, but I wasn't in Los Angeles, so I did it online. And each semester you write a script. You're in a class that you're doing similar to this. It's similar to, I don't think it was Zoom as the medium, but it was something like Zoom, where you're in essentially a conference call video room with 5 other students and a working screenwriter. So they're not only giving you writing feedback, but they're also giving you professional advice. And it's set up in the same way the UCLA screenwriting master's writing intensive classes are set up. You just don't get to take like the electives that you would be able to take in a master's program, or if you want to have a specialty in a specific type of film or screenwriting that you're not going to get. This is, you're either comedy or you're a drama, or you're either doing TV or film. So those are the specifications for what I had to apply to. So I applied to comedy TV. That was the program that I ended up being in. And it was great because it was also leaps and bounds cheaper. And so it was one of these things where I was like, let me see if I'm actually good at this and if I enjoy it. And one of the things, to answer your question about the difference, for TV specifically, it's a really collaborative process in the sense that you're in a writer's room. And so you're throwing out ideas and you're bringing in pages and everyone's critiquing them and being like, oh, well, that's good, but wouldn't it be funnier if X, Y, Z? And so there's a lot of collaboration. When you're writing a book, it's you and the voices in your head. So it is a very different process it took me a really long time to get into a rhythm. When I was writing Color Me In, I ended up having like it was almost like a ritual. Like I was give myself time to wake up in the morning, and then I would get to a place like, okay, it's time to write. I would make a latte, I would have some breakfast, and then I would sit down and I would work for a certain amount of time. I would stop to get lunch. I would maybe take a walk, and then I would come back and I would work until my husband came home, and then we would have dinner, and then I would keep working until who knows when. And that was how I did it. And it's tough. It's really tough. And a lot of people do like critique groups, critique partners, beta readers while they're writing. I can't do that. I wouldn't feel comfortable because I'm always going back and making notes like, oh, fix this, or oh, do that. And so it's not like a fully realized product until I've finished it and then gone through it one more time. But it is very, it's a very big difference in that way, and that it's on you versus you have a whole group of people that are working together to create something.
Okay, so we have you in Los Angeles, but you live in New York now.
So I live in New York, and at the time I was living in Oakland. I was traveling back and forth to LA for trips, but I've never lived in LA.
Okay, so you moved back to New York in the last few years, or?
I moved back to New York right before my baby was born, because I'm a New Yorker, my husband's a New Yorker, and we weren't going to have...
Baby's a New Yorker.
Our baby's a New Yorker, yeah.
How long did it take you to write the book?
In total, so like start to finish, I would say about 2 years.
Okay, that's pretty decent, especially for a debut novel. And I was actually looking at it and thinking, it's not like YA is often kind of shorter, but it's not particularly short either.
No. Mm-mm.
Okay, we have some questions here. Kim says she was currently a social worker, and she's curious what led you to the field and whether it has any influence on your writing or filmography.
Yeah, so one of the best classes I ever took in college was my senior year. I had finished all the requirements for the English major, and so I was able to take just any of the classes within the major that I wanted. And there was this really incredible class that was merged between the English department and the theater department, where you were going into a women's prison to teach Shakespeare. And so it was my first time really interacting with the incarcerated community and having an insider look at what prison is and does and the effects it has, the long-term effects. And it really, it changed my life. And I felt like, to this day, prison reform and prison justice is a huge cause that I champion, and having the ability to go in there and bring a medium like theater, like script and writing and storytelling, being able to combine that with this social justice work was something that I just found really powerful. And so I think in my head, and I was so young, I just graduated college. In my head, I was like, I really want to immerse myself in this world on a professional level, and in a way where I'm hopefully affecting change for good. But I think in my head, my goal was to hopefully create some program where I could have more of those classes going on that I would be facilitating, and also hopefully having go on far beyond what I could do, but like hiring people to start a whole collective of teaching artists, I guess. What I did learn pretty quickly when I was working for the organization I was working as, I was an admin, I was the assistant to the executive director, but I was doing a lot of volunteer work with the organization as well. I started a book club, and I was doing a few other things. Like we were having like a monthly meeting. I'm not a very good teacher, is what I learned. And so what I ended up doing was realizing that it probably wasn't going to be the right career path for me eventually, when I did fall into this other work, and it felt so right for me. But I did join the junior board of that organization. And so I've stayed involved with them on that level, which has been really cool.
Okay, we're going to switch gears a little bit. We have a question here from Nora, and actually this is one of the questions I had from email. She writes, she loved your book to start with. That's always nice to hear. And she'd like to know, the cover of the book is very interesting. Can you tell us more about it? Did you have input into how the cover was created? And to add to her question, the title as well.
Yeah, so so this is something that I feel like a lot of people asks. Authors don't really have much say in the cover. It's really your editor can sort of decide how much input they want to allow you to have. I have a really great relationship with my editor, and she, I think, having only worked with me for a brief period of time, she could already tell that I was going to have input, whether or not it was going to have any impact. And so she, from the jump, was like, we're going to send you the drafts. You tell us. If you absolutely hate it, we won't do it. So there were a few versions, but from the first draft, it was pretty close to what it is now. The biggest change, and the one that I was sort of like, I just feel like something's missing, was initially the silhouette was empty. So the words weren't there. And so the title was there and my name was there, but the poem that's written through her body was not there. And it felt sort of really jarring to have this stark white body with the color in the background and the two people on the sides who are her cousins who have so much vibrancy. And so she was like, okay. And so then we tried it with just having little versions of the title throughout the body. And that just didn't look right because it I don't know, it just looked odd. And so we were almost going to go back to her being blank when my editor was like, what about one of the poems? And so we tried it and we all loved it. So, and then the title, I can take zero credit for. My managers, we were brainstorming over email because I pitched it. I was like, guys, I have the best title. It should be called Bop Mixed Fa. And everyone was like, that's a horrible idea. So, so we were brainstorming, going back and forth, and we were sending, different, just like playing with words. And one of my managers was like, what about Color Me In? And I was like, oh, I love that. And I just sent it to my editor immediately, and she liked it, thank God, because since I am just like notoriously now known for like not titling anything. So I can't take any credit for it, but I love it.
It's a great name. Yeah. It really suits the book.
Mm.
To that point, you talked about the poetry a little bit, so let's go there. Tell us about, how did the poems come about? Because they're so lovely and they really add such so much to the book. So how did that all transpire?
Yeah, so the first draft of the book didn't have the poetry, and something was missing. And when I went back to revise it the first time, I was trying to think about if, Nevaeh and I are very similar and very different in a multitude of ways. But when I was thinking, like, what would I do if I was her? And when I was a young girl, I would write poems. That was how I figured out my emotions. I'm an only child, and so I didn't have like a sibling that I could talk through things with, someone who was my age. Like if I didn't want to talk to my parents about an issue that I was having that felt like something I couldn't talk to them about, or I didn't want to, or I wasn't comfortable, I would write poems. And so I was like, what if she does that? And so I just started trying it out, and it was working really, well. So I decided to just do it throughout the whole book and just see what my editor said. But it ended up, what my goal was to give us a peek into her thoughts, because throughout the first half of the book, like, she's really internal. She doesn't have much of a voice. She has to come into her voice, but she does have ideas, and she does have feelings and thoughts that she just hasn't figured out how to communicate. And so the poems are these moments where we jump inside of her brain, and we see her sort of many times fumble in her reaction verbally, but internally you see this is sort of, okay, this is what she's struggling with. And so it was really lovely to be able to incorporate that as something that I knew myself as a young person, I utilized as a way to deal with my emotions.
It was a really nice aspect of the book. I really enjoyed that part.
Thank you.
Joanne, can I ask you to unmute yourself, and you can ask your question.
Okay, bear with me here.
You're good. I can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Just notice how awful my double chins are. Like, oh my God. Okay. I have it on my notes, so I'm just reading them. Love the book.
Thank you.
And how well written it was. The rich personification, the vivid descriptions, the similes, metaphors, as well as the poetry. And I found myself dog-earing the book and highlighting passages I loved. And my background is a teacher, but kindergarten teacher, not early years, or I'm early years, not middle years. But the one, there were many passages, but one was just touched me because I could really see, like, you immersed me in every moment. But when the condensation from the air conditioner gathers on the window, I watch the drops slide down the glass, making the magazine cutouts of women with outdated hairstyles plastered to the inside cry. And it's like, oh my God, that's amazing. I hope that your novel will be used in curriculum studies in middle years and high schools. So my question is, when you write for young adult, is there a process that you use to tap into the education market, or your mind didn't even go there initially?
Yeah, no, I could never, even throughout the whole process of writing the book, and thank you so much. That was so beautiful. I appreciate that so much. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. I never could have imagined that anyone would be teaching anything I wrote. And so really what I was aiming to do was write the book that I myself didn't have as a young person, not necessarily as something taught, but just as literature at all, that reflected back to me the experiences in the world that I was living in. I never had a book that did that as a young person, and I could have desperately used it. And so that was really my goal, was to write the book that young me could have used, in the hopes that other young people, and people who are not young but like were similar to me, did not have that, could see themselves on the page.
Because as an educator, when they're looking for books for novel studies, like you check all the boxes of what you want to bring to your students, good literature. And you did touch on situations that are very real to students, not so much middle years, but the older, like the sexual feelings, the identity. It's just very, very rich. And I did actually pass it on to some of my friends who teach older.
Oh, thank you. That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanne, for asking that. That was great. Mary Jane, before I lose your question here, I'll just ask Natasha this. She says, for your future work, are you thinking about using any of your experiences working with women in prison as a basis for a story?
You know, I've thought about it. I want to always try to be very careful that I'm not co-opting another person's story to tell. I think that there is a world in which I could incorporate some of what my experience from my, someone coming from the perspective I did, the impact of that experience and how it changed my worldviews and recognize certain privileges that I had been afforded. But I also I think there are many people who are a bit more closely linked to the incarcerated community and who would be telling the stories that I think are most important to be told are the people who are a part of the system rather than the people who are outside of the system. And so I would want to try not to center myself as an outsider too much, just because I think there are really incredible, necessary stories from inside that have not really been told yet that need to be told. That being said, it's definitely one of a very impactful experience that I had, and something that I have a few times sat down to write a few ideas for stories that have that include that relationship a little bit in that experience, but I haven't figured out exactly how to do it in a way that I would feel comfortable and feel like it would be doing the storytelling the best service, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense. I want to make sure we have enough time because it's so important. In the back of the book, you wrote a letter. Mm-hmm. And so many people have brought up this letter in the last couple of weeks because it's probably the most impactful part of the book because it's real and it's from you. And so I just want, first I want to ask you, the letter you write in the back of the book, it really spells out to the reader how much this book means to you and how connected you are to the characters and the storyline. Did you ever think about writing it as a memoir instead of fiction?
No, so I didn't. One of the biggest hurdles that I had writing it, though, was divorcing the story from my real life. I'm telling this deeply personal perspective and experiences, and one of the things that happens when you're doing that is you feel a lot of pressure to make sure you're being super authentic and that you're doing justice to the experience and the communities that you're representing. And so to me, at first, it felt like, okay, to do that, I need to say exactly what happened to me. And what you discover when you're doing that is like most people's lives aren't really that interesting to read in that way. And so I had to keep reminding myself that it wouldn't be inauthentic to take the experiences I had and reshape them in a way that made for an entertaining read. But it was really difficult to do. It was difficult first to have to revisit those memories and to have to sit in that feeling that I did for so long as a young person. But it was then a second level of difficulty to feel comfortable taking those experiences and really turning them into the story that this book became. Because as I say in the author's note, it really is inspired by my experiences, but it is fiction. And so, that was the closest I ever came to writing a memoir. And I will tell you that I will likely not be writing a memoir now that I've gone through that exercise.
Fair enough. So you also say in the letter that this book was a way to explore your Jewish ethnicity, sorry, and background. And while doing so, you had a lot of flashbacks to your youthful self. How did that feel, and what was that experience like for you?
It was tricky. My relationship to my Jewishness has been difficult because I'm not particularly religious, and I was never made to feel very welcome in the community for a multitude of reasons. I had some of the most it's unfortunate, some of the most blatant racism that I've experienced to me directly has happened in Jewish communities. And so I never felt like it was something I could claim. I never felt like it was somewhere that I could belong or something that I could really feel is one of the things that defines me. And so one of the things about writing this book was this was my attempt 30 years into life to take that back and to say, you know what, no, like I am Jewish, and it's something I'm proud of. It's a beautiful culture. And what's been amazing about it is I have, for the first time in my life, felt very welcomed into the community. There have been so many people and members of the Jewish community who have reached out to me and who have welcomed me and who have heard, the message that I was trying to relay about how, unfortunately, there is some anti-Blackness and racism that exists within white Jewish communities, how that was taken to heart, and how it's opened up dialogues and conversations about not just that issue, but also giving some representation to communities of Jewish people of color, of which there are a lot, and who rarely get recognized as members of the Jewish community as a whole. And so that for me was a really unexpected but really lovely experience, because I sort of went into it being like, I'm going to be a one-woman parade in my Jewishness, and then I've really felt like I've become a part of the larger community, which has been awesome.
And to kind of further explore that, the book is very timely with Black Lives Matter movement. How has the reception to your book been? I had a lot of our members reach out over the last few weeks during book club and say just how much this book has helped them understand either certain aspects of Judaism or growing up biracial or even systematic racism. So what did you hope your readers would take away from this book?
Oh, so many things. I mean, the big theme for me is it gives anyone and everyone the confidence to take full ownership of who they are, and take pride in all aspects of their identities. On a more specific level, there were I feel like I was being pretty direct in some of the messages I was trying to get across about constantly evaluating your privileges and considering how that could impact your relationships, and your placement in the world and your visibility and your voice, and how sometimes you have this power that you take for granted, and how so many people are just dying to have just a taste of it, and how you can offer that to other people, whether they're members of your community or just people you know or come across. I also hope that it teaches people really the power of voice, and sometimes that the most powerful way to use your voice is to shut up and let someone else speak. Also though to really find the joy in your heritage and in the little things, like the jokes around the dinner table, and the secret closets that get you up onto a roof that you sit and see a sunset, like the little moments that happen in your life, that when you look back when you look back on, you think like, wow, that was such an amazing thing that happened, and it gave me this it gave me this feeling of power or pride, or it gave me this joke that I still tell. You know, whatever the case may be, it's really about finding your sense of self and not backing away from whatever that means.
For me, just there was a line in the book that I'd just like to call attention to, because I think the idea of systematic racism has been a hard one for some people to understand, myself included. And you write in that letter on the back of your book that if a person is not actively fighting against oppression, white supremacist systems that hurt and hinder communities of color, specifically Black communities, then he or she is complicit in them. Personally, I found that that was like such for myself was an easy way to understand, because it's kind of a concept it's been thrown around a lot, and there's a lot of confusion around it. And I thought that you had done a very good job at explaining it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's become, and it's become a more it's become a less taboo thing to talk about, but I still think the language that is being used at times is not directly addressing the issue, which is why I tried to be as direct as possible throughout the book, but also specifically in that note. And it really, for me, is about being active in the process of becoming and engaging with anti-racism. And so what that means is not that you're not going to mess up, or not that you're not going to know everything or understand everything, but that you're constantly working at it and open to learning more and understanding more. That intention behind it is really, for me, what is the most important, because I think for so long, the way I've come to think about it, and this is specifically being in the States with everything that's been going on the past 6 months, which, you know, it's not the first time we've run through these horrific events, but I think what the pandemic did was so many of us are trapped inside that you couldn't avoid it anymore. And so it sort of feels like people have been just sort of looking through like a frosted glass window, and, you know, you can't really see, you maybe know something's going on outside, but you can't fully see it. And so you're just like, well, you know, it's fine. It's nothing, doesn't seem like anything crazy is happening. I can see something, but I'm not a part of it. I'm inside. And there's now a crack in that window, right? And you can see pretty clearly. And so you have the option to keep looking or to walk away. And I implore people to continue to look and to sit in discomfort and to engage in conversations that in the past have been taboo and have been honestly, like, not very supported on a larger scale, right? Like in the past, it was always like, we don't talk about that, right? And so I think it's the opposite. I think it's being like, no, like, let's have the conversation, let's do it, and let's work through the feelings and figure out why. So it's about moving away from complacency and into a very active, intentional process. And the real thing about it is, you know, it's not something where you're going to read a book, whether it's my book or any book, and then understand it, right? Like, that's not how these things work. It's a constant process of checking in with yourself in moments where you maybe think like, oh, you know, sometimes when you're like having a conversation or you're watching something and you're like, oh, that joke doesn't really hit right. But you sort of let it go. Don't let it go, you know, like, tap into that and be like, oh, okay, I think I'm catching something. I think that's something. And because chances are the person who's saying it is not actively trying to hurt people, right? But they don't know. And so if they don't know, they're not going to know unless someone tells them. And so, yeah, so that was really that specific message that I was hoping would come across.
Thank you. I'm going to change gears yet again. We always love to ask this question about literary influences that either went into this work, or other books that you love, or authors you love, or even genres. Do you only read YA, or?
So I'm a huge YA reader. I love YA. I also am a big proponent of whatever you're writing, whatever genre you're writing in, you should be reading. the great thing about YA is every genre is within YA, right? So that's really about the target audience, the demographic that you're writing for. But you know, there's romantic comedies, there's coming of age novels, there's fantasy, there's anything you want, you can find in YA, and I love it. I love the way that YA books can sort of have this pretty directness in the way that they speak, and it's because I feel young people are that way, and especially right now, like young people are the ones who are doing the work out in the world and who are making huge strides in terms of change and the way that we're changing our communication. And so I love that I can pick up a book and have these ideas and thoughts that I've kept in my head and see them out loud, and then know that that's really true to the community of people that the book was written for. It feels like you're not just writing something for entertainment, you're writing something that's going to have impact. And that's something that I truly love. And I don't think only needs to have impact for young people. I think there are a lot of people of any age who can take and learn from these books, because that's what a lot of these books do, is they're teaching lessons with it wrapped up in an entertaining bow. And so, yeah, there are tons. I'm trying to think of a few. In terms of inspiration, as I said before, I never really had many books growing up that I felt spoke to me directly or who relayed my experience back to me. There is an incredible author, James Mcbride, who he writes adult books. He doesn't write YA books as far as I know, but he wrote this really beautiful memoir called The Color of Water, a Black man's memoir of his white mother. And it was one of the few books that I read where I saw like a sliver of myself on the page, and I just kept reading it over and over and over. And all of his books are fabulous. But I believe that's his only memoir, his only nonfiction, and then he writes adult fiction. And I couldn't recommend his writing more. He's so vibrant on the page. He's incredible. In terms of YA books, some authors that I just are instant buys for me, Tiffany D Jackson, she writes thrillers and they're so good. She takes real life criminal investigation cases and then sort of remixes it to be in a YA format. And her books are incredible. I cannot put them down. I was going through a really big reading slump a couple years ago, and I picked up one of her books, and halfway through the book, I ordered her other book because I was like, I need more of her. She's amazing. Justin Reynolds writes really amazing work. His first book was called Opposite of Always, and his second book, I think it just came out. I have it in my bedside table. It's called Early Departures. He's just a really gorgeous writer. And a book that I read recently that I loved was called Dread Nation by Justina Ireland, and it's about like badass young women killing zombies, and it's awesome. Highly recommend.
Well, you just gave everybody plenty of books to add to their
Yes.
read list for sure.
Yes.
Before I miss Nicole's question, she wants to know what you see as the target age range for your book. She is a middle school teacher librarian.
Yeah, so I found it interesting. So I wrote the book as an upper YA book, right? There's like pretty intense moments. There's a sexual assault that's pretty graphic. There's a few instances of police harassment and brutality. So in my mind, it was like sophomore year of high school and up. It's being marketed as 12 and up. And so I really, part of that too is just about I haven't engaged with 12-year-olds in a while. And so I think it's entirely possible that could be, that media and books and TV and everything have sort of raised the, that sort of, I don't know what it would be called, like the barrier, like kids that age are engaging with that sort of content. And so I really think it comes down to personal judgment of the young person and whether or not this would potentially be be a little bit traumatic for them or not. So it's one of those things where the publisher itself is marketing it as 12 and up. Personally, I think 14 is probably the youngest I would go. But again, there could be 12-year-olds that totally, are reading above their age level and would read it and not be upset by it.
Nicole just commented on her thinking it would be good for grade 8s.
Yeah, I could see that.
So just to wrap up, I'm sorry, I'm feeding my daughter is why you can.
Oh, it's okay.
My head right now.
No worries.
She was screaming, so I didn't have a choice. But I did want to know what's next.
A few things that I unfortunately can't talk about, but things. Yeah, I'm working on another book, which I'm really excited about. And it's very different. And I'm also still doing some screenwriting stuff. So a few things in the works in that department as well.
And so you're working on another book. Do you have like a release time frame-ish, so at least we can?
I don't. The hope is potentially toward the end of 2021, but
Okay.
it's very possible that things might get pushed to 2022 because everything that's going on. So yeah, so that it's sort of TBD. It hasn't even been announced officially from the publisher. So for all intents and purposes, it doesn't exist, but it does.
Okay. Well, we'll look for your name. And I mean, you have a great website, and she also is very active on Instagram.
Yes.
If anybody wants to follow her there, then you can look her up on Instagram. Natasha, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Time.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you all so much. Oh, I did want to just comment. I saw in the chat, it's Tiffany D Jackson. Okay. Is the name of that author, Tiffany D Jackson. Oh, right. She's fabulous. Yeah, she's fabulous.
Awesome. Well, thank you, ladies, for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
And and we'll look forward to whatever it is that's around the corner.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope everyone's healthy and safe and being kind to yourselves, because this is a wild, wild time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Natasha.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.